Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Todd Humber, the Senior Editor for OHS Canada. I'm thrilled to be joined by our partners at Tyndale. They will be talking today about ARC-rated PPE and emerging trends. Before I introduce our panel, just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. You, the audience, are in listen-only mode. That means we cannot hear you or see you, but we definitely want to hear from you. We've got some time set aside at the end of today's session for a Q&A. You can enter your questions at any time using the Q&A box, which you'll find on the bottom of your Zoom webinar control panel. Today's webinar is being recorded. You will receive an email with a link to the recording in 24 hours, so please keep an eye out for that. Without further ado, let's introduce the stars of today's show. We are joined today by Scott Margolin, the VP of Technical at Tyndale. Prior to joining Tyndale in 2016, Scott was a firefighter for 6 years, then spent 10 years at DuPont working with Kevlar and Nomex, leading their flash fire business for 4 years, before spending 16 years as the International Technical Director of Westex. He is currently chair of the ASTM F1959 ARC rating standard, as well as Home and Industrial Laundering Standards F1449 and F2757. Scott is also chair of the board of the Partnership for Electrical Safety. He has conducted or observed over 4,000 flash fires and more than 3,000 electrical arcs at laboratories all over the world. So, short explanation there. Scott knows his stuff. Our second panel is Jason Brosen. Jason is the lead safety and technical trainer for Tyndale. So, Scott and Jason, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Todd, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are. That's a quick look at who I am. What about who Tyndale is? And Jason will introduce himself when the time comes. Tyndale, you may or may not have heard of us, is a leading provider in North America, especially to the utility industry. Been around since 1981, but so Z462, 70 electric utilities, oil and gas, you name it. We're the second largest at this point in North America behind Cintas, about 95% of the investor-owned utilities in the United States customers, along with a whole bunch of Fortune 500 companies. We like to offer a wide array of choice and innovations, not your standard stuff. There's also made in North America, made in USA lines and women's lines, and we're family owned and women owned. So that's enough about us. We're going to spend a couple of minutes kind of making sure that we're all on the same page about why we need FR and AR clothing. And the reasoning is really relatively simple. The vast majority of serious injuries and fatalities are not caused by the arc flash or the flash fire or some other brief thermal event. They're caused by the arc flash or the flash fire igniting flammable clothing, and that flammable clothing continuing to burn long past the brief thermal event you were exposed to, and of course over much larger percentages of your skin's surface. So the solve for that, besides not getting into those circumstances to begin with, is really simple. It's don't wear fuel, and you'll hear that from me a lot during the course of the day. At any rate, there are a whole bunch of standards that bear on this in both of our countries, and a lot of them, like Z462 and 70E, there's very significant overlap. So what's the role of this stuff? There's two goals of arc-rated and flame-resistant apparel, and most people understand this one. It's to save your life by not igniting and continuing to burn, right? We talked about that a second ago. But there's a second goal that people are less generally familiar with, and that is to limit or eliminate injury so that you're not hurt at all or you're hurt minimally, and that's the insulation. So in the arc world, that's an arc rating. It's flame-resistant, so it's not going to ignite and continue to burn. The ARC rating lets you judge how insulative it is to the hazard you have, and so does the NFPA 2112 rating. We used to have 15520, but I believe that we're mostly in a 2112 world there. So those are two important goals. Don't ignite, that's the don't wear fuel part, and make sure what you're wearing is appropriate to your hazard so that you're insulated from that hazard and you're not injured through the garment, second degree or worse at all. Talk more about it. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. Videos are literally thousands of pictures. There's no debate here, right? That's as stark as it can get. These are all downloadable, by the way. All these videos are available to you guys for free to download and use as training aids. What about in flash fire? Well, which one of these garments is flame resistant and which isn't? It's not rocket science. That, by the way, is the University of Alberta in Edmonton. I spend an awful lot of time in Canada, either at U of A in Edmonton or at Kinectrix in Toronto. They're the two main labs that we use in North America for all this work. So those are the logic and the videos. There you have it. So what about FR versus AR? Z462 about 4 or 5 years ago made a big deal out of AR, and that has confused a lot of people. So the good news is, if you're wearing ARC-rated apparel and you've got to go to work tomorrow inside the fence at a petrochemical facility, and the guard at the shack says, yo, are you wearing flame resistant clothing or you can't come on our site? The answer is yes. If it's ARC rated, it has to be flame resistant just to get in the ARC rating test. So I'll say that again. If it's an ARC rated garment, it has to be FR, even just to be tested for its ARC rating. Not all FR is AO. So not all flame resistant fabric has been tested in ARC, because if you're selling to welders, why do you care? But all ARC rated clothing is flame resistant. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so why do you need it? Again, the most catastrophic injuries and fatalities, and that's a mannequin, by the way. I like to keep it real, and each time I turn the page from mannequins in labs to real people, I'll warn you in advance, but that's a mannequin. And you can clearly see here that the arc it comes out of the box, right? It hits him in the front, doesn't hit him in the back. But as soon as that shirt ignites, you're now going to expose much more of your skin surface area to fire than the arc would have if you were naked. And that is, again, because you're wearing fuel, you're covered with fuel. And the part of your body that typically doesn't have that clothing on is up here, right? And where does heat go? And where does fire go? So it's not a good thing to allow to happen. Where flame-resistant clothing and arc-rated clothing won't ignite, will self-extinguish, and limit the area of injury. And if it's insulative enough, the area of injury under it as well. So again, not to belabor a point, let's get put all that aside for a minute. Let's spend 2 or 3 minutes talking about what we're looking to avoid here. This, if I said, why do you have to wear a seatbelt? Well, you either wear it because you don't want a ticket, or you don't want to go through the windshield or the steering column or the B pillar or whatever. This is kind of like that. When there's an incident, and you're hopefully never in this position. If I were live, I'd ask how many of you have been. You're sitting in the burn center or the emergency room. You're waiting for the surgeon to come through those double doors. The first question in everyone's mind is always, will he live? Will she make it? What's in the burn surgeon's mind at that moment to answer that question is 2 things. Generally, the age of the victim, the older you are, the less likely you are to survive the same TBSA or total body surface area that receives 2nd or 3rd degree burn, and the TBSA or total body surface area. So age and total body surface area. Now, 1st degree burn is sunburn. We've all probably had that. It hurts, but it heals. We don't need medical intervention. We measure it, but we don't report it because it's not predictive of fatality. So if you know 2nd and 3rd degree burn, and you just heard me say, well, it's 2nd and 3rd degree burn combined that predict fatality. Why? That makes no sense, right? They're clearly way different injuries. So let's explore for a minute what makes them the same for predicting fatality, because every fiber that you can buy for arc and flame resistance, every fabric, every garment, every brand, every standard, every ASTM test, every CGSB test is all predicated on the fact I'm about to get to that's not written on this slide. So 2nd degree burn is blisters, right? That hurts, but it heals, and you typically don't need medical intervention. 3rd degree burn is full thickness. The skin has been damaged deeply enough in the tissue that it won't grow back at that location. And now you need grafting, which is incredibly expensive, incredibly painful, and very, very, very time consuming. Life as you knew it, if you have any significant percentage of 3rd degree burn, is over. You'll never quite get back to who you were physically. And the psychological trauma of these sorts of burns is devastating. And not just to the victim, but unlike most other injuries and sicknesses, it's also can affect it from a PTSD perspective, and divorce and substance abuse and stuff like that. Coworkers, spouses, kids, family, friends. It's an amazingly broad circle of people that this affects. So if 2nd and 3rd degree burn are clearly very different, how can it possibly be that they're the same for predicting fatality? The TBSA, or total body surface area of your skin surface that receives either 2nd or 3rd degree burn, is directly related to how likely you are to live or die. So what do they have in common that makes them the same for predicting fatality? And the answer to that is they both break the skin. It's that simple. When you break the skin, you have an infection path, right? And where do they take you when you get hurt? Well, they put you in a helicopter or an ambulance, and they take you to an emergency room or a burn center where there are more infectious agents than anywhere on the planet, including all the antibiotic resistant ones. Good luck. It's really that stinking simple. All of the ARC-rated and flame-resistant fibers, fabrics, garments, standards, tests, you name it, come down to that simple fact of minimizing or eliminating 2nd degree burn and worse, because that's what predicts whether you'll live or die and how happy you're going to be if you live. It really is that simple. Please don't wear fuel. The bottom line with all this, accidents happen. I don't care how good your behavioral safety is, how good your training is, how good your company is. Stuff happens. Sometimes it's not your fault. Somebody else left a piece of equipment in the gear. You open the door, boom, right? Somebody else made a mistake 6 years ago or yesterday, and you're in the way when it happens. And if you're wearing flammable clothing, you're much more likely to suffer fatal or catastrophic injury. There's two things that predict whether you live or die. I mentioned age and I didn't cover it. The older you are, the less likely you are to survive the same body burn level, because as you age, you heal more slowly. What's that do to how long you're in the hospital around the bugs, right? But you can't do anything about your age. That leaves you one variable that's in your control, short of finding a new line of work, and that is don't wear fuel. Don't work energized if you don't have to. Don't work inside a hazardous/fire zone if you don't have to. If you're going to do those, recognize the hazard and don't wear fuel. Okay, so with that grounding, let's get to a little bit of video. These are all downloadable. Skip this one, I apologize. So what happens to polycotton workwear in one of these circumstances? So all these videos, education, and now, flammable clothing, here comes an ARC. And that's a bad day at work. Stop, drop, that out time matter. You can see how quickly the fire spreads to areas that the lower legs, back that never hit. Clearly, little holes are all right here. Now we use GoPros for a lot of so you get a really up close and personal look at these things. Okay. The biggest myth in our business is that cotton's protected. Cotton is not protected. It has four major problems. It ignites as easily as you can clearly see. Burns hotter, meaning you'll do more damage to yourself. Fire spreads more. Thing. Way harder to extinguish foam extinguisher. You're not using water around your electrical gear. In a foam extinguisher, this will reignite, reignite, reignite. And cotton's heavier, meaning more fuel, longer fire, worse burn. So cotton is not acceptable except as a base layer, completely covered by FRC. There's not a standard in each countries that it or does logic. So if you still have people operate because at least melt, that's completely a myth. It doesn't melt, but it ignites, it burns, and it's just as likely to kill you as meltables and meltable blends. What about flame-resistant and arc-rated clothing in those same circumstances? And again, wrong video. So this is actually exceeding the arc rating of the garment a little bit. I want to show you that on purpose. You know, often ask what happens. We have 9,000 but damaged by copper, burn, it doesn't have a hole in it, and you are completely protected. Oh,
Scott, if I could interrupt, I think your video is stealing some of your bandwidth, so it's cutting out really bad. You might need to show the video and then kind of give the background. It's, okay. Every time the video is playing, we're catching about every third word.
Interesting. So hopefully the videos are still playing, because that's anything I would say.
You might just play the video and then cue up the commentary afterward.
Okay, appreciate it. Technology isn't always there yet, right? So all these videos again are downloadable. They're all narrated, so you don't need to hear my talk right now to be able to use these in the future. But as I mentioned at the outset, I like to keep things real. So that was the lab. What about real world? Now, I've learned better than to use pictures from a country that I'm speaking in. So these are from South America. All it takes, folks, is to once in a live presentation run into people in the audience who know the victim on the screen, and you'll never make that mistake twice. At any rate, the guy on the right side of the picture who's not wearing a shirt took the shirt off because they were asked to wear cotton, because cotton's safe, right? But it was heavy and uncomfortable, and he took it off. The guy on the left is wearing his 7-ounce cotton shirt. The arc hits him in the back. There's no shock here. He's hanging from the fall protection harness and trying to put the fire out, but he can't, of course, get the leverage to do it. By the time they get him upright and in the bucket, the only part of that shirt that has not burned off this man's body is his left arm from the elbow to the wrist. You can see if you look at the back, second and third degree burn already occurring. Those things happen in second degree burn happens in less than a second at these temperatures. So what does it look like when your shirt burns off your body from the waist up? That is third degree burn. The average adult North American, Canadian, Mexican, American, doesn't matter, 60% or so of their skin surface is from the belt up, more if you like your beard. 50% is the body burn percentage above which you're more likely to die than live. It's not hard to run the math and say, if your shirt ignites and burns off your body as it did here, you're in serious trouble. You may have heard of the golden hour. With third degree burn, it doesn't hurt for most people immediately. They're in sort of systemic shock, not the shock that causes you at risk of death. That happens later. But you're in enough shock at the moment that it doesn't typically hurt right away. So this individual was able to call his wife and ask her to meet him at the hospital and apologize to his coworkers. And that's the last time anyone ever spoke to him, because they intubated him and put him in a chemically induced coma, and he died 6 days later. So what we just talked about for the last 10, 12 minutes is real. It happens on a weekly basis and sometimes on a daily basis. 90% of the time, it happens because these levels of injury happen because people were wearing fuel, whether they were never issued FR or ARC-rated clothing, or they were issued it and chose not to wear it. It happens because they're wearing fuel. So let's talk about ARC flash and ARC ratings. The STMF 1959 test method, the ARC rating method, which I happen to chair, the vast majority of that work is done at Connectrix in Toronto, and it defines ARC flash. There's two ways to get a rating: ATPV and EBT. These confuse a lot of people. The truth is, it doesn't matter whether it's ATPV or EBT. They're just two different ways to fail the same test. The test is the same. The fabrics are the same. The difference is how it fails that test. What do I mean by that? Well, an ATPV fabric will let a burn through the fabric, but not a hole. An EBT fabric will allow a hole through the fabric, but not a burn. Well, you don't want either a burn or a hole. So we keep testing until we get either a burn through the fabric or a hole through the fabric. And that's kind of where you stop. I'm oversimplifying it a little. But then you have an ARC rating, either an ATPV, meaning you got burned before you got a hole, or an EBT, meaning you got a hole before you got a burn. Either way, you don't want a burn or a hole. Both ATPV and EBT protect the wearer from burn injury below the ARC rating of the garment. So they're the same in that sense. Neither ATPV nor EBT garments protect the wearer above the incident energy rating on that garment. So they are different in how they fail the test, the same in every other respect. Put that to bed. They both protect equally. So the testing, this is maybe more detailed than you want. There's an ARC Week episode from last year. That's Brian Shields at Connectrix explaining it. But that ARC Week episode, if you want a 10-minute deep dive into how all this is done, is season 3, episode 3 of ARC Week. We take the cameras to Connectrix live, but you have the Faraday cage here. You have these 3 fabric samples that you see pictured at the bottom. They go over these rectangles. The 2 circles that you see behind that rectangle are thermocouples that measure heat transfer through the fabric. The 2 vertical electrodes, which Brian is pointing to one of, they get a wire stretched between them. You pass power through them. That causes the arc. The Faraday cage causes that arc to stand still in space. All 3 fabric samples are exposed at the same time to the same arc, and then we see what happens. And that the heat transfer through the fabric measures one thing. And then if you can see, if this is easy enough to see here, there we go. That thermocouple in front of Brian's chest here, and this one, they average. So let's say here's your fabric panel. And let's say that measures a 10 and that measures a 12. We're going to call that an 11-calorie arc. So you're averaging those 2 thermocouples. What you get, this is what an ARC rating report looks like. So the 12.4 calories is mostly what you're looking at, right? But what is that comprised of, so that you know? It's a pass-fail test. There's 21 red dots because you have to have 21 pieces of data. So you do 7 arcs, 3 pieces of fabric in each arc, 21 pieces of data. It could vary a little, but let's keep it simple. If the dots are on the bottom of this axis here, you got neither a burn through it nor a hole in it. If the dots are at the top, you got either a burn through it or a hole in it. So the top axis failed, the bottom axis passed. Now we look at that data, and what do you notice? Look at the top axis, 16 calories, 15, 14, 13, 12. There's no dots below 12. Where'd they go? They're all down here. What's that mean? Below 12 calories, we never got a burn or a hole. Look down here, start at 10 calories, 11, 12, 12 and a half. Above 12 and a half, there's no dots anymore. Where'd they go? They're all up top. What's that mean? Above 12 and a half calories, we always got a burn or a hole. What's the area of overlap? The area of uncertainty. About 12 to 12 and a half, where you got dots at the top and the bottom. That's it. That's a really good test. It's a really small area of uncertainty. The computer then averages that data, the top that failed and the bottom that passed, and it creates a black line through it at the 50% probability on that, where the 50% probability of a burn crosses our average. You come down to the bottom of the graph, and that's your ARC rating, 12.4 calories for that fabric and everything ever made from it. It's a really good test. And again, the vast majority of this work is done in Toronto at Connectrix. So now that's how you comply. What about compliance versus protection? Are they the same thing? It may be, maybe you think they are. A lot of people do. Safety people are busy. You got fall protection and hearing protection, backs, and worried about people backing their vehicles into things. You name it, illness, whatever it happens to be. So it's really tempting to take a shortcut and say, anything that's Cat 2, I'm fine. 8 calories and above, I'm Cat fine. 2112 compliant, I'm fine. 15520, I'm fine. What nobody ever tells you, and you won't know unless you look, is how many times is that fabric sample washed before it gets in these tests. And if we were live and I did this, I guarantee you some of the people in this crowd right now are cussing because you had no idea it was 3. So what's an ARC rating tell you now? It tells you how good the fabric is new, and it tells you nothing about how durable that flame resistance is to laundering. Nothing. If you're going to wash your garment 4 times. 1506, which you have to have or used to have to be 70E and Z462 compliant, requires 25 launderings. Well, okay, if you wear your garments during the week, launder them on the weekends, wear them again the next week, 25 launderings gets you how long? It gets you 6 months. You're now out of arc flash FR durability standards on planet Earth at 6 months, 25 launderings. What do? Trust matters, reputation matters, experience matters in this business. Now, 2112 and 15520 have a 100 laundering standard, which is better than 25. However, know 3 things about it. You still, if you're counting for your guarantee on those standards, in theory, you still have to count launderings, because how can you prove you didn't launder it 101 times or 110 times? Number 2, it's a self-submitted sample. Who's going to submit a sample for testing that they don't already know will pass? So of course it all passes. Pardon that, my Siri thought I was talking to it. 3, it's under perfect laundering conditions, which, give me a break. Who launders things that way? Stuff happens in the real world. So there is no guarantee of flame resistant durability by any of these standards, no matter which country, no matter which hazard you look to. Experience, track record matter, and they matter a lot. Again, the compliance, what a lot of people will do is shorthand. I want inherent, I want Cat 2, I want 2112, I want UL certified, I want the lightest stuff you've got. What they probably should be specifying is trusted brands and suppliers, guaranteed flame resistant for the life of the garment without an asterisk that says per 2112 100 launderings. By the way, weight doesn't equal comfort, and you might want to start specifying Opiotex 100. That is not Canadian or American, but neither of our countries has a good standard for toxicity of chemistry and fabric, which is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. Now, all the reputable stuff that's produced in North America, there's really no issue there, but more and more we see products where there are issues, inexpensively made, cheap products from overseas. Opiotex 100 will make sure, if it passes that any fabric chemistry that's there, and that includes dyes and finishes, not just FR chemistry, is below thresholds that are of concern. So again, I mentioned I like to keep it real. So the stuff I just mentioned, compliance versus protection. This video is real. It's right off of YouTube. Does that look flame resistant to you guys? 10 launderings in, the owners of these garments noticed a funny smell. They said it smelled like cat pee. They sent it for testing, not flame resistant. Flame resistant fabric that washed out in 5 or 10 launderings because it was poorly made by people who didn't care about anything but taking your money. Here's another one. Now you can see this is a South American company. The pants are the good stuff. Shirt is not. Again, just a handful of launderings. And while that's not a catastrophic fire, it is absolutely indicative of the fact that the flame resistance is being washed out. That fire is not going to kill you, but you are going to be breathing fire and you are going to be burning your face. So these issues are real. They are happening. This, I know you're not going to read all of it, but at least 143 Ergon Energy workers are breaking out in blisters and vomiting after wearing toxic uniforms recently provided to the workforce. This is Australia. $3.5 million they spent. The safety people specified the quality products. The purchasing folks got involved, and to save about $2 per garment for stuff that lasts 2 or 3 years, by the way, run the math on that. They specified something instead from a country whose name is here, but I won't read out loud. Do you think they got any of their $3.5 million back? No. They ended up with 250 plus people affected, 143 of them in the hospital, uncertain whether the effects were permanent. The fabric itself was toxic. The fabric itself, the chemistry. They suffered chemical burns, not thermal burns. These garments are designed to prevent blisters. Those garments caused blisters. If you don't think the story can get any worse, they pulled all that stuff from the workforce, they landfilled it, and they put their line workers back in 100% cotton while this was working its way through the Australian courts. So during that time, while their workers were back in flammable cotton. They had a lineman up a pole in an arc, his clothing ignited, and he died. This just does not need to happen. You stay with the reputable brands, the proven experienced brands. This is not a business where the lowest cost product is probably worth exploring. This is the biggest cause of failure. That shrinkage is not a joke. Not a joke. I mean, that's ridiculous shrinkage. It's what, 120, no, whatever. It's crazy. So shrinkage with these garments, a lot of these fabrics, the last thing that you do if you're a fabric manufacturer, if you pre-shrink, is pre-shrink. The equipment's expensive, the equipment's slow, it's often the bottleneck in your production. If you have a 1,000-yard roll right before you're going to sell it to Tyndale or Carhartt or Ariat or Bulwark, you got a 1,000-yard roll of your fabric. You put it through the shrinkage machine and it compacts it. And out the other end, you get about 900 yards. What'd you just do to 10% of your inventory? Gone forever, right? Gone forever. But if the garment fabric manufacturers don't pay for the shrinkage, you will. So you don't want to be throwing garments away a quarter of the way through their useful life because they don't fit anymore. So we look back to the standards, whether it's Z462, 8 cals, 2112. They don't tell us about the FR durability of the garment. They don't tell us about the flash fire protection. You'll just say it's less than 50% if it's 2112. You don't know how much less unless you ask. They don't tell you about shrinkage and flame, which matters a lot. Can you get the garment off using the zipper or the buttons, or can't you? They don't tell you about shrinkage and laundry. They don't tell you about potential toxicity unless you specify Opiotex 100. And they sure as heck don't tell you about the thing you probably care about the most, or your wearers do, and that's comfort. Because if it's not comfortable, they're not going to wear it. You're not going to be compliant. So let's turn the page there. Boring, we'll skip that. Comfort, heat stress, and FRC. Heat stress and comfort are not the same thing. They're completely different, and that surprises a lot of people. Comfort is inherently subjective. If we were live and I looked around a room with 130 people in it, I guarantee you, even though it's the same temperature and humidity in the conference room, there's people wearing long sleeves sitting next to people wearing short sleeves. There's people wearing one layer sitting next to people wearing 2 layers, sitting next to people wearing 3 layers. There's people wearing wovens that button up. There's people wearing pullovers. There's people wearing quarter zips. What is comfort? Comfort is inherently subjective, person to person, moment to moment, and it doesn't mean what you think it means. Where heat stress is a definable, quantifiable medical condition caused by body heat building up inside your body that you can't dump either by radiation or by sweat. And then you have organ failure and potentially death if you don't arrest the process. So PPE, hugely important line in this presentation. No single layer breathable apparel, arc-rated or flame resistant, causes heat stress. I'll say that again. No single layer breathable AR/FR clothing causes heat stress. What causes heat stress is non-breathable, like Tyvek or rainwear, multiple layer like 40 cal arc flash suits, but not single layer breathable. Heat stress is caused, number 1, by poor hydration, because now you can't sweat. Number 2, by lack of shade, because now you're not getting out of that radiant heat load from the sun. Number 3, by lack of rest breaks to dump metabolic energy you're building up in your body, and sometimes by illnesses or medications, right? It is not caused by single layer breathable PPE. So on the comfort front, the stuff coming in your screen now is what almost everybody thinks when you talk to them at a trade show causes heat stress. And pardon me 1 second, because I don't want my laptop to die. I'm going to go plug it in and continue to talk. That was a mistake on my part, for which I apologize. I thought it was plugged in, and it's not, but it will be. We won't lose you. Always fun. Okay. So what is comfort? It's not the weight of the fabric. It's not the hand. Breathability is what everybody thinks. Weight and breathability. Give me your lightest weight, most breathable product. Well, the lightest weight, most breathable fabric that Jason and I are aware of is window screen. You're not wearing window screen. So it isn't about numbers. A combination of these factors, maybe, but at the end of the day, what really controls comfort is choice. Number 1, if you've ever gone to the beer store, or you've ever taken a kid or a grandkid to the cereal aisle of a market, you know Canadians love choice, agency, the ability to decide for yourself. With some people, they want a quarter zip. With some people, they want to wear the color that they like, blue, red, whatever. With some people, what they want is a brand, Nike, Under Armour, Bulwark, Tyndale, whatever it happens to be, Ariat, Carhartt. That's what makes them comfortable that day. The brand they're flying, or the color they're wearing, or the style. When you go to the store in your personal life to buy a garment, do you walk in there and look for the rack of the lightest weight clothing? You go to the rack of the brand you like, or I'm looking for a quarter zip today, or I'm looking for my Levi's today, or my Carhartts. That's what you look, only then do you touch the stuff. So choice is number one. Number two is fit. If it doesn't fit, it doesn't matter what it's made of. And only then do the things that most people think matter start to matter. So anyhow, that's the difference between heat stress and comfort. The number one thing you can do to improve an FR or ARC-rated clothing program tomorrow, to have complaints go down, compliance go up, garments last longer, is to give your people choice, for you to choose from among garments that meet your protective needs and your company's branding and image needs, and then give them a choice of multiple options from within that so that they have agency, they have choice, they order it, they own it, it gets shipped to them, they're more likely to wear it, they're more likely to wear it properly, they're more likely to take care of it, it's going to last long. It's human psychology is improper wear. Once, okay, what happens if they're partially unbuttoned, exposed? Okay, so not much cotton was exposed, right? But guess what? Now you're breathing fire, you're burning your face up under the face shield, and the t-shirt, the fire is spreading underneath the FR clothing, and the FR clothing is now keeping the heat in, not out. So we have a whole series of improper wear videos designed. They're all brief, non-commercial, educational, narrated, so that you can show people the dangers of doing these things. So if you see all the smoke pouring out the buttonholes of that shirt, that's because the ARC got up underneath the untucked shirt, carbonized the cotton t-shirt that the mannequin's wearing that he should have been safe in, and he's now being burned underneath it because the shirt was untucked, allowing the ARC to get in there. Here's another video. This one's meltable base layer. So what you noticed was there was fire. It's just because it's meltable doesn't mean it's not flammable. There was some fire. And then when you take the ARC-rated outer layer off, look at, I'm not going to mention the brand name, but this is molten polymer all over the place. Now, good luck with that. So there are probably 15 of these videos that highlight different improper wear. Feel free to download them and use them anytime you want in your safety talks. All right, we're coming toward the end here. We'll wrap up and then turn it over to Jason for an electrician's view on all this. Where is ARC-rated and flame-resistant clothing going? Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but I've been doing this a long time, and I can tell you what I think. So I will. There's been a huge expansion the last few years of fabric brands, fiber blends, garment brands, laboratories that do the testing even. That's all arguably good, but it makes it harder to keep track of everything, even if you do it full-time like I do. So what I would urge you guys is, more important than ever, so it's better for choice, right? Better for compliance. You've got more options, more comfortable, more stylish, lighter weight. But more important than ever as a result, to have a knowledgeable, trusted FR/AR resource, whether that's somebody in your company who you pay to get current and stay current, or somebody on our side of the fence who you trust. Make somebody like that a part of your life. Write a tight specification. Monitor that specification so that 2 years later, when you're worried about fall protection, some vendor that you've just hired because they're low cost isn't sticking something in your program that's not good for you. And the service provider matters a lot. Your people's lives are at risk here. Some of you know me. You know what I do in my personal life. It's mountain climbing, shark diving, stuff like that. If we're going to go climb Everest tomorrow, I'm not hiring the low-cost bidder. I am hiring the best, most experienced, safest service provider there is, because my life's on the line. Same thing in our line of work. You want to be really careful where you buy the stuff. This product, I won't bore you with the video, but when we ordered it, because we knew we weren't selling that product on Amazon, this is where it came from. We don't have an office on Hanggang Lane in Shanghai. The garment that came wasn't a case of bad FR, poorly applied. It was a flammable cotton t-shirt, a $3 cotton t-shirt, fraudulently and criminally misrepresented as FR, right on down to the pad print Cat 1 logo on it. Outrageous behavior, happens all the time on these websites. So be careful from whom you get the gear. Make sure it's what you think it is from people who you trust to deliver that. There's a video to that, but it's too long to air right now. So the future, high vis is getting bigger and bigger, and as are sort of the styles that we wear when we're off the clock, right? So knits have gotten way better than they used to be. High vis has gotten better than it used to be. Those are options that a lot of people like now that they are practical and affordable, and in some cases stylish. So you have more garment manufacturers, more styles and types. Base layers are a big deal. Now that knits have gotten lighter and better, you can wear ARC-rated and flame-resistant base layers that are actually lighter than a regular cotton t-shirt, don't burn, add to your ARC rating, add to your 2112 protection, and are quicker drying than a cotton t-shirt. They exist now, and they're not a fortune, and they don't have massive shrinkage anymore. The branded lifestyle apparel, you're probably familiar with Ariat and Carhartt and Wrangler and all that. It's amazing how much stuff has come out in the last few years. That is, you can't tell to look at it, to wear it, to wash it, that it's FR or AR. It looks just like regular apparel. And boomers retiring, millennials coming in is changing the styles as well. Another big thing that's happening is people who started in task-based. I'll put on an FR coverall when I need it, otherwise I'm wearing this. That is slowly being replaced by daily wear where it makes sense because of continued injuries in task-based where people just weren't wearing the gear because they weren't required to. In terms of styling, that's flame resistant. That's flame resistant. That's flame resistant. That's flame resistant. Chances are at this point, if there's a style you like in your personal life, it exists in FR. It just really is. All of these, the holy grail forever, was a Cat 2 2112, truly lightweight, soft, comfortable. All of these are dress shirt weight or lighter. They're all under 5 ounces a square yard. I apologize that I didn't convert that into grams, but they're all dress shirt weight or lighter. They're all Cat 2. They're all 2112. So you have plenty of options now. None of those existed a couple of years ago. There's also women's apparel has never been remotely what men's was, and sadly probably never will be. But they're now just within Tyndale. By the way, we have the largest selection of women's AR and FR in the continent, but there's over 450 styles that we carry. So there's new women's products being developed all the time, and they're developed for women. They're not a men's small becomes a woman's large. They're truly legitimately made for women from the pattern right on up, including maternity wear. So you have those options now. Catalog allowance programs have been big, and they're getting bigger almost every week that goes by, where it's a retail experience like an LL Bean or whatever. You know, Roots, you go online, you have a selection in a catalog that's been pre-selected for you by your safety people, and you order what you want from that selection. So that is a major trend these days. Arc flash layering tool. You didn't used to be able to take advantage of layering if you didn't have a layering tool. Now there's a mobile enabled layering tool. It's 3 pokes. What arc rating do I need? Let's say it's 12 calories for the job I'm going to do. What do I already own that gets me there? Or what's in my company's catalog that gets me there, or what's in stock that gets me there? 2 keystrokes, and every combination of clothing that gets you where you need to be populates the app. So those are kind of the broad brush. Power of choice, access to future innovations. The stuff is coming out so rapidly that's lighter and better and softer and you name it. You don't want to limit your access to it by signing some kind of a 4 or 5 year deal you can't get out of or add things to. The headaches, you know, you're not in the clothing business. You're in another business entirely. You should be in with a clothing vendor who doesn't waste your time having to manage a clothing program and has the expertise and tools to help you. And you can also often reduce costs with those kind of programs. So that's it from me. With 8 of our next 10 minutes, I'm going to turn it over to Jason, and then I'll have a few closing comments. Take it away, Jason.
Hey, thanks. I'm sure your guys' head is about ready to explode. That's a pretty deep dive, but why does this matter? So I'm going to start with who I am. So I've been a master electrician for around 28 years, the construction industry for over 35 years. And now currently I'm a CESCP, Certified Electrical Safety Compliance Professional. That's an NFPA certified trainer in the 7E. It's very similar to your publication, if not identical, right? So those are my vocation, my profession, but I'm also an arc flash survivor, which is my mission, vision, passion. So I joined with Tyndale here recently. I'm one of the newest additions there on the technical side, because Tyndale's mission, vision, passion is the person side of what you just heard Scott talk about. It's the workers that don't get burned to death, right? What was really important in my accident is I was not wearing any PPE, right? And so now with Scott there and with myself there, we have done something that's unheard of in the industry, right? It's unprecedented, and we have a technical resource that you can use to keep your people safe or yourself safe, right? So please use us as a technical resource. The flash that I was, involved in was a 12208 three-phase ARC, which completely smashes all the arguments that a 12208 cannot sustain an arc that can damage you, right? And I'm here to tell you right here is living proof that it does and it can. Most everybody in all the presentations that I do talk about being scared of 480. Oftentimes 480 is a lower calorie rating than the 12208. So the exciting thing, why am I at Tyndale, right? My mission, vision, passion, like I said, is to save lives. I want to really highlight, because Scott had a lot of information he had to go over, but the ARC week, right? I really, really, really encourage you guys, get on your laptop, get on your desktop, and get on Tyndale's website, go to the blog and look up ARC week. This year was a highlight year. I've been watching it for years. It's always fantastic. This year, the first 3 episodes are 3 ARC flash survivors. Okay, survivor number 1, young apprentice, didn't have PPE, just wanted to please his boss. He got blown up, 42% burned. It's catastrophic. The second one was myself, Jason, right? Mine was, I've done this for a million years. I know what I'm doing. I don't need PPE. The whole complacency aspect was what tripped me up. The third one, Brandon Schrader, 5 o'clock on a Friday, didn't have his PPE, wasn't going to drive back to the shop on a Friday and get it. All 3 different reasons, but all 3 of us were burned for one reason. We did not have the right PPE, right? And a couple of things that Scott said too is, for me as an electrician, there's been this negative kind of thought about PPE. It's just hot, it's cumbersome. But you look at, with the styles and the weight these days, you got people that like to dress country western, right? You got the Wrangler and the Ariat. You've got boots and shirts that match the style that they want to wear in the weight that is comfortable. They will take care of their clothes if they look like they want to. You've got some styles, by Bulwark, I just saw at a conference this weekend, that are very modern, right? And new and fresh. And then, everything we carry at Tyndale is amazing product. It's all tested, and it's just fantastic stuff. So like I said, I'm the newest addition to Tyndale here in the technical side of things. Scott and I intend to work very closely and make some videos for you guys. We might show some of this. Scott's got it queued up. And
you want to show that, Jason? Okay, I'll run.
Yeah, you can show a few minutes of it, and you just kill it when you want to, and then we'll start taking some questions.
Were you able to hear the narration or no?
No.
So that's the first 10, 15 seconds, 8-minute ARC week. But Jason, take it away.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's a taste. I didn't want to talk because I wasn't sure about the bandwidth. It was going to eat that up. But again, I really encourage you guys to look at that, pull those up, share them with your teams. We have been approached recently by several people that want to see those and show those to their team out there in the field. I think that's pretty much all I've got. I don't want to take up too much time. I know we only got about 10 or 15 more minutes for questions.
Why don't you go ahead and talk for a minute about the consequences of that?
Oh yeah, great. I appreciate that. So my arc flash is very small, 14% burn, right? I would be considered, on the low side. Hands and face, most common injury in arc flashes, because your hands are right in there doing the work and you cause the accident. Most electricians are too proud to admit they caused the explosion. They just say, I don't know what happened. It just blew up. But usually it's a tool, a screw fell, a cover got dropped, a wire springed over. But in my accident, 14%, I was in ICU for 2 weeks. One of those weeks was in a coma. The doctors told my family, look, we've put him in a coma. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We need to wait till it stabilizes. So there was a lot of fear, right? And my whole family was affected. Scott touched on that earlier. The PTSD. There's also acute stress disorder, ASD, that typically you suffer with for a month or two. But those 2 weeks in the ICU were hell, quite frankly. I got skin grafts on my hands, or a deep 3rd degree burn on my hands, deep 2nd degree on my face. Again, that accident was small, but the OSHA violations were approximately 65,000 and approximately 220,000 in medical bills. And the bottom line is, it's about $5 to every dollar spent on medical expenses with all the other expenses. So that gives us around $1.2 million for a small accident, right? And again, to reiterate what Scott said, you've got family that now has to drive you around, now has to wipe your butt, now has to button your shirts, and now has to deal with you in your mental, emotional state as well as your physical state. So hopefully that gives you enough.
Thank you, Jason. So again, there are 3 really good episodes, each 8 minutes or so, from the perspective of the ARC Flash survivor and what they want you to take away. And Jason is, of course, available to you as needed. So again, closing with this, that's a real world story, right? 12208 almost killed Jason and still affects his life to this day. Does the ARC-rated clothing work in real world, or are you just a pretty corpse? So this gentleman, his company about 6 months prior to that was in flammable clothing, and they had put him in ARC-rated clothing, and they made it daily wear, which is a good thing because this is not an energized test. He's digging a hole, and he's about to hit a 4 kV feeder with a metal pickaxe, which is a really bad idea. When this pedestrian gets even with the worker, you're going to see a boom. 6 months prior to this, it would have been catastrophic or fatal. Had it been a task-based program, it still would have been catastrophic or fatal. 3, 2, 1, boom. Real world ARC Flash. Now, he's not wearing a face shield because he wasn't expecting energized work, but he can see well enough to climb out of the trench. He can see well enough to step over the other trench. He missed 1 day of work. They took him to the hospital. They kept him overnight to check out his eyes and his lungs, and he missed the next day of work just for safety's sake and was back. ARC-rated clothing works. It will save you. Here's another one. This is from Brazil. There's a dash cam. These guys had been in flammable clothing not long prior to this also. Oops, don't know what's going on there. And they were put in ARC-rated clothing. You like their limited approach boundary, by the way? That's as close as they're going to come to getting injured. 10 calorie ARC coming. They're in full Z462 compliant gear. Three. Up come the face shields, right? They're okay. Even though they were out of sight of supervision. Even though it was a bigger arc than everything was rated to take. The reason that I get so happy about this is the culture change that what you're about to see represents. 6, 8 months prior, this would have been catastrophic or fatal for both of them. But they were wearing the clothing, they were wearing it properly, even though they were out of sight of supervision. They set up their limited approach boundary. They did everything right except what you're about to see. So the culture change that I like so much about this one, at this company, you were supposed to turn in your hard PPE, your tools and hard PPE at the end of the day. So, voltmeters, hard hats, whatever, gloves, rubber gloves, you turned that in. Clothing you took home and laundered. So the first time the foreman finds out about this is when he sees what you're about to see. They turn in their PPE. The foreman goes to issue it the next morning. And it's trashed. The gloves. What's up with that? Well, this would have been fatal or catastrophic for 2 people not long prior. But with the appropriate ARC-rated clothing, it was such a non-event that they finished the workday and told no one. I'll repeat that. They told nobody, and they finished the workday. And the first thing the supervisors knew about it was when the equipment was going to be reissued the next morning, and it was trashed. And they went and found the dash cam video you just saw. So this stuff can and does, on a weekly, if not a daily basis, in the United States, Canada, and other places, form the entire difference between catastrophic injury or death and going home. That's our time. We appreciate yours. We'll take any questions that we have time for. And after that, I put mine and Jason's email and phone in the chat. Feel free to reach out to us anytime about anything.
All right, thank you, Scott and Jason. I'm going to start with a comment rather than a question. The comment from one of our attendees named Jen is, she says, this might be the most engaging webinar she has ever attended. So well done. We've gotten some really positive feedback just on the presentation. We've got some questions, so we'll get to a few of those. The first one up, and whoever wants to take this, jump in. Scott, Jason, it's up to you. What guidance do you recommend for personnel to know when the FR has been washed out of their coveralls, pants, shirts, etc.? How do they know it's time to replace it?
That's a great question. It's probably the big one, right? The answer is, I don't mean to sound like a salesman, I'm not. If you bought it from Tyndale, it isn't ever going to wash out. Everything that we sell is guaranteed flame resistant for the life of the garment, both by the manufacturers from whom we buy it, let's say it's a Carhartt or an Ariat instead of a Tyndale made, and by Tyndale above and beyond that. We will not sell you anything that can be washed out. Now, that said, there is stuff out there that if you wash it wrong too much, you can wash it out. If you wash it too much, you can wash it out. We won't sell it. Unfortunately, the only way to be 100% certain is a destructive test. So, if you have garments that you're questioning, you can send them to us. We'll test them for free in our vertical flame chamber, and we'll let you know. But of course, at that point, it's too late, right? It's time to replace everything. It's not like one of those turkeys at the holidays where the little thing pops up when the turkey's done. You cannot simply count launderings. You can't. So that's why I said what I said earlier. Track record matters. Experience matters. I mean, the fabric manufacturer, the garment manufacturer, and if it's through distribution, the distributor. Who you work with matters a lot, and this is why. So, your best interest at heart, not money.
So to clarify, the life of the garment means that it will mechanically fail before it washes out. Just add some clarity for that. So you'll start to see holes in your clothing. It's time to get rid of it.
Yeah, you should not be retiring an ARC-rated flame resistant garment because its FR is worn out. You should be retiring it because it can't be repaired adequately anymore, or it's too contaminated with flammable contaminants. Speaking of which, if you have can I put this insect repellent on it? Is this sunblock okay? Again, we will test for our customers for free in our vertical flame lab. The only way to know is to test.
Gotcha, thanks. Next question. This is a bit of a long one, but stick with me because I think it's a good one. Michael says here, we recently introduced FR for our welders due to burns from sparks, etc. There's been a lot of pushback as welders are already working in hot conditions. As you mentioned, it's more comfort than safety when it comes to heat, as they're able to take breaks as needed. The question here is, where do I even start to properly evaluate whether full FR coveralls the right control for this type of burn? Is FR clothing a better option?
Yeah, that's a very complicated question. The answer, rather. The question is too, but some people just wear leathers, right? Some people will wear welding greens. The welding greens are typically very inexpensive flame-resistant apparel that will wash out. It's designed to wash out because by definition, you're getting so many pinholes from welding slag that it's not going to last 50 or 100 launderings anyway. You're going to be getting rid of it in 25. Now, that said, if you go to quality, durable, flame-resistant protective apparel for welders, you need to, make sure that it sheds. So there's plenty of ARC-rated or FR clothing where the welding slag will stick. You don't want it to stick. You want to make sure it sheds. Not every FR or AR fabric is appropriate for welding. And number two, you want to make sure that you're not, I hate to say, wasting your money. If these welders are where they also have an arc flash or a flash fire hazard, they probably need to be in that clothing. But if they're not, now you're taking a coverall that might be 80 or 100 bucks instead of 40 or 50, and you're still throwing it out 25 launderings because of the welding pinholing, right? So it's always a very delicate balance in your specific situations of the safety and protection needs you have versus not spending money you don't need to spend to get that protection.
Gotcha. Okay, the next question here. This is about cleaning and laundering. So first of all, TJ says Tyndale rocks, so we'll let him make that comment. So an endorsement there. How do you audit dry cleaners to ensure that they are cleaning your FR/AR gear properly?
Good luck. Dry cleaning. So with the FR fabrics that we sell, I can't speak for the world, but again, anything that comes from Tyndale, you're going to be able to home launder it, industrially launder it, or dry clean it. None of that is going to take the flame resistance out. Now, that said, to the questioner's point, in theory, that dry cleaner could be doing something really wacky. That's a problem. And you would have no way to know except for destructive testing. So again, it comes back to hiring a dry cleaner who you know understands the do's and don'ts for ARC-rated clothing and is following them and will confess if they haven't. Now, that said, again, I didn't talk about it in this webcast, but the prohibitions for FR clothing typically are liquid chlorine bleach, no liquid chlorine bleach, no fabric softener, right? We've probably all heard that. You want to know the truth? Hugh Hoagland, in an IEEE published paper a few years ago, subjected ARC-rated and flame-resistant clothing to 50 cycles of liquid chlorine bleach, and it had no effect. I'm not saying it's okay to bleach it. I'm not. There's lawyers, but it had no effect. 50 cycles of oxidative bleach, no effect. 100 cycles of fabric softener, no effect. So this stuff is harder to disrupt than you've traditionally been led to believe, especially over the last 10 years as the technology's gotten better. But again, the only way to know they're not doing something they're not supposed to be doing is destructive testing. You know, trust and then destructive testing on the back end. But again, it is significantly harder to really hurt this stuff than you think. And if you're truly terrified of this concept, then we make sure we get you only inherent clothing where you cannot remove the FR under any circumstances, as opposed to will not. When I say will not, the definition, by the way, so let's say a garment will put up with 100, 120 launderings mechanically, and then it's just garbage, right? The fabric's worn out. Well, you can maybe launder it 200 times before it burns, but you can't get past 100 before you have to throw it out mechanically. So that's what I mean by, anyhow, maybe too much info. Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, one thing I want to add to that too is in the resources that we have on Tyndale.com, you've got some stuff that we did for fun, I'll call it. Spin cycles, one of them, and where we actually do the actual washings, dryer sheets, lint, all that stuff. So you can follow up and get a lot more information on Tyndale's website on all those resources.
Great, thank you, Jason. We've got a couple minutes left here, so I think we can handle a couple more questions. This one here, any concerns or roadblocks about ordering PPE from the US into Canada?
There should not be at this point. That all depends on what it is that you're after. But the vast majority of these garments, other than the provincial striping requirements, the fibers, the fabrics, the test methods that they're exposed to are universal enough now that it really would come down to whether there are any specific provincial requirements around location or amount of striping.
Great, thank you, Scott. This one here, we actually ran a session earlier this year on PPE for women, and this touches on that. The question here says that there's been a lack of choice in women's flame-resistant clothing, which has been an issue. Are we seeing improvements in selection and availability for women?
So the good news is we've seen massive improvements. The bad news is massive when they used to have 0.05%, and they now have 2% in real terms. So for a very long time in our business, women were such a small percentage of the workforce who required this clothing that manufacturers either largely ignored it or they did what's called shrink and pink, which is when you take a man's small and it becomes a woman's large. Luckily, most of the major brands, Tyndale included, in the last 5-6 years have created garments from the pattern up. The pattern itself is a woman, and it recognizes that women, and I want to be careful how I say this, women's body types vary significantly one to another more than men's typically do. So there are not just patterns made for women from the pattern up, but patterns made reflecting multiple different styles. I hate to use the word style, but body types for women. So it's not just a color or pattern, it's all of that combined. And while no single company, a Carhartt, an Ariat, a Wrangler, a Tyndale, a Bulwark has hundreds combined, you do have a significant offering. And there's even one company now that only makes women's workwear. I believe they're called Dovetail. They only make women's workwear, and they've expanded into FR and ARC-rated clothing the last couple of years, and we stock a lot of their stuff too. So it's not where men's is. It's vastly better than it was a few years ago.
Yeah, and I'll add to that just a quick plug. We do a tremendous amount of boot sales. And the only reason I bring that up is because our VP of sales was at a conference this week, and she has a really, really awesome, very attractive set of boots that are steel toe, made for women. They're an industry type boot. So there is a lot of footwear and clothing coming out in the last year or two. It's really kind of blown up. Seen a very big increase.
Great, thanks, Jason. And just to go back to the last question I asked before that, we did have a comment come in the chat that said you've got a customer setting up a program in Alberta. They've had no issues with shipping to date. So a little bit there. So that does bring us to the top of the hour. So Scott and Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. As the audience noted, it was a very engaging webinar. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience did too. A reminder to everybody on the line, you will receive a link to the recording of today's webinar by email. Look for that in 24 hours. It will be sent to the email that you used to register for our session today. So on behalf of OHS Canada in Tyndale, we thank you for joining us, and please have a safe rest of your day.
Thank you.